Okay, the second part of herbicides and plants. Most herbicides must enter plants and reach an appropriate site of action before toxicity is expressed. Successful herbicide action requires herbicide absorption, translocation in the plant, and avoidance of detoxification, which means loss of activity prior to an attack at the molecular level on some process vital to plant growth. There are 5 possible fates of herbicide applied to plant foliage listed here. The first one, the volatilization from foliar surfaces and loss to the atmosphere. The second one, the retention on leaves in a viscous liquid or crystalline form. So the third one, the penetration of the cuticle and retention in lipid solution. Number 4 is absorption by the cuticle, and finally the number 5 is penetration of the cuticle. Foliar herbicide has some advantages and disadvantages. There are obvious advantages to foliar herbicides. Foliage is a readily available site of entry. There is often a high efficiency of foliar absorption, and treatments can be designed and scaled to control specific observable with problems. There are equally important disadvantages though. Application timing is often critical because the herbicides may be most effective when applied at a certain stage of plant growth, such as the herbicides active only at post-emergence. Some herbicides are not absorbed well by foliage and are also readily absorbed by roots. Wetting plant surfaces is difficult, and weather conditions at the same time of application affect performance. Herbicides control small plants better than large ones, but small plants do not have many leaves, and contact and absorption may be inefficient. It often takes several days or even weeks for some plants, such as in perennials, to grow enough foliage so good absorption and activity can be obtained. Some herbicides also are directed at soil without any intention of foliar entry. Most foliar herbicides are applied as broadcasts, and much of the spray hits soil because it necessarily misses plant foliage. Because many herbicides are applied when plants are young, most of the soil surface is exposed. Thus, soil becomes an avoidable target and repository for much of what is applied. Herbicide fate in soil becomes a significant determinant of performance and environmental effect. We will discuss this topic in the next topic on herbicide and soil. Advantages and disadvantages of soil applied herbicides. So application timing of soil applied herbicides may be convenient and economical because it can be combined with other operations. The effectiveness of pre-plant or pre-emergent soil applied herbicides is not dependent on stage of plant growth or physiological conditions at time of application. Positional selectivity can be obtained by placing soil applied herbicide at a particular depth relative to the crop, plant or seed. Soil applied herbicides have important disadvantages. There is a tremendous dilution by soil and soil water following application, and the amount available to plants is low. There is a fixation by soil colloids, so adsorption, that reduces the amount of herbicides available for plant absorption. Foliar herbicides are affected by weather conditions at application, whereas soil applied herbicides are more affected by weather subsequent to application, especially dry conditions. There is often a dependence on rainfall, irrigation, or soil incorporation for distribution and action. Persistent residues that may injure subsequent crops can occur after use of some soil applied herbicides. Different plants absorb herbicides at different sites. Grasses vary in seedling morphology, location of the mesocotyl, and depths of seed germination. Selectivity of dilate and trilate between wheat and wild oats is due to differences in location of the site of herbicide uptake. In wild oats, for example, the mesocotyl elongates into herbicides treated soil where the herbicide is absorbed after seed germination. Wheat and barley have a short mesocotyl that does not elongate into the herbicide treated zone. Depth of the herbicide zone in soil can be controlled by incorporation depth, and positional selectivity can be obtained when these herbicides are used to control wild oats in wheat or barley. Root exposure has an effect, but wild oats survive. Cleoptile exposure results in plant death because of absorption by mesocotyls of emerging seedlings. Translocation is important because to be effective, most herbicides must move to sites of action. Translocation takes place through phloem and xylem, the transport systems in plants. It is common to find a direct correlation between foliar absorption and phloem transport and root absorption and xylem transport. It is helpful to think of phloem translocation as movement from source to sink. Movement from source to sink often occurs with photosynthetic transport from regions of high carbohydrate synthesis to regions of high use. Sources are points of entry of herbicides, and sinks are sites of high metabolic activity where herbicide express their toxicity. So which means that you need to look at between the source and to the sink. So the source is where the photosynthesis is happening, and the sink is where the product of photosynthesis is stored. So this is how the movement of translocation for the herbicide movement. Rate of translocation for one herbicide varies between species and with different environmental conditions for one species. Many patterns are possible, and not absolute generalization can be made. Modification of a known herbicide's chemical structure usually eliminates phytotoxicity. This is not always true, but is a good generalization. An example of plant metabolism is conversion of simazine to hydroxysimazine, a derivative with no herbicidal properties. Once an herbicide is absorbed by plants, it is susceptible to metabolism and loss of biological activity. The faster an herbicide is metabolized, the less there is available for translocation and activity at the site of action I repeat, the faster an herbicide is metabolized, the less there is available for translocation and activity at the site of toxic action. Many metabolic reactions occur in plants, but the most important are oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, and conjugation. One of the most striking features of herbicide is selectivity. These factors affect selectivity of herbicide application. Okay, try to pause this video, read one by one, read all these factors, and then try to understand the list. There are no ideal herbicides. Some come close, but none meet all of these criteria. Herbicide selectivity means that all plants do not respond in the same way to all herbicides. They are used in agronomic and horticultural crops, lawn and turf, forestry, or aquatic sites is dependent on selective activity. Herbicide selectivity is dependent on morphological and metabolic differences between weed and crops. For most herbicides, selective action occurs over a relatively wide dose range. This gives users some assurance of selectivity and avoids catastrophe in small errors in sprayer calibration or applications are made. The selective selection and effectiveness of herbicide depends on differences in their toxicity at their cellular level. Selective action also depends on all the factors that influence the amount of herbicide that reaches sites of toxic action in cells. In general, for maximum effectiveness, the ideal herbicide should have the following: the ability to enter plants at various sites, the ability to enter plants without local damage, the activity or ability to affect plant growth that is not confined to a particular stage of plant development or plant size, the ability to translocate in plants to appropriate sites of action, and 5, the metabolism or degradation to inactivity in target plants should be slow enough to permit full expression of activity. These are the summary of the ideal herbicides. But at the same time, I hope you guys can understand this and try to relate the text that I gave the lecture before, because for herbicide, dose is the most important determinant of selectivity. Okay, all herbicides have a recommended dose for particular tasks, and applicators need to know and apply the correct dose for each weed crop situation.